I think I started my career sort of at the Shrine Auditorium. I think so.
Shirley Temple was the most famous child star in Hollywood history. At 18 months old, she could match notes with perfect pitch. By age 6, she had saved an entire studio from bankruptcy with her voice. But something happened as she grew older, something the studios never wanted you to know. In 4 of her films, the voice you heard wasn't hers at all. The real singers stayed hidden for decades. One of them cried when she finally told her story. Another went on to dub for some of the biggest names in Hollywood. The truth behind America's little sweetheart goes deeper than anyone expected. Shirley Jane Temple entered the world on April 23, 1928, in Santa Monica. And from the start, her parents felt something bright moving through her. Her mother, Gertrude, saw it first when Shirley was only 18 months old. She noticed the little girl humming lullabies with perfect pitch, matching every note as if she had been practicing for years. Fewer than 1 in 10,000 people have that kind of gift. Yet here it was inside a toddler who had barely learned to talk. As she grew, the sound around her became something she could copy with ease. By age 2, she was already repeating melodies she heard. And by 3, she was performing small routines Gertrude taught her each day. The family watched her work through lines in bed and dance steps in the living room. And professionals who saw her early on kept shaking their heads in disbelief because she carried herself like she had been raised backstage. Some even called her the Verdi of Vine Street, and although she was just a child, the nickname fit the way she absorbed music. Her mother kept training her day after day, quietly building the foundation that would soon change Hollywood. That foundation carried her straight into the baby burlesques when she was only 3. These were 10-minute comedy shorts where toddlers played adult roles, wearing diapers with tuxedo tops and imitating scenes from famous films. It shocked adults who watched, but Shirley's natural charm pulled focus in every frame. She earned $10 a day in 1931, which mattered more than people realize, because the average family barely made $1,500 a year. Her mother received $5 for managing her hair and helping her on set, and they kept returning because each short made Shirley more recognizable. They filmed inside Ethel Meglin's dance studio, and by the end of that year, she had appeared in War Babies and Glad Rags to Riches, becoming a tiny face people remembered even before they knew her name. Controversial or not, these shorts sent her toward stardom and set her apart from every child performer of her time. While she filmed, her voice kept growing. Her mother hired a vocal coach when Shirley turned 4, and suddenly, her days were filled with scales, breathing exercises, and tricky melodies that older singers struggled with. By 5, she had learned more than 50 songs and even practiced opera arias meant for trained adults. Critics noticed the clarity in her pitch and range, and they compared her to Jeanette MacDonald, a respected Hollywood singer with an operatic tone. Shirley kept surprising everyone by slipping into any musical style she tried. She even learned Japanese songs that she performed in 1937 to international praise. Her coach said her voice sounded like a polished adult's voice, tucked inside a small child, and all that early work shaped her into someone directors and producers wanted on every set. Her film debut arrived in April 1932 with The Runt Page, a parody of The Front Page, filmed at Universal Studios. She played Lulu Parsnips, a playful nod to columnist Luella Parsons, and her performance left executives stunned. They couldn't believe a child that young could joke, sing, and mimic an adult so naturally. The short became a hit and pushed her into more roles. It also proved she could handle satire, timing, and character work in ways that felt effortless. The Runt Page opened a door that never closed again, and her growing list of films made her one of the most promising young faces in Hollywood. Soon she returned to the baby burlesques for Pardon Us for Living in 1932. She was only 4, yet she handled a parody of film stars like Dolores Del Rio with a confidence that startled the crew. She sang to the moon with a tiny vibrato that sounded almost professionally trained. Director Charles Lamont later said her vocal control at that age rivaled adult singers. Since it was the pre-code era, the films used adult humor and gestures that made some viewers uncomfortable, but Shirley performed every scene with a strange mix of innocence and maturity. Her ability to mimic older performers made the public pay attention, and by then, her rise felt almost unstoppable. Then 1933 arrived with War Babies, one of her most controversial films. In it, she wore a diaper and acted out adult flirtation while singing Candy. Some UK theaters banned the short for child exploitation, yet the world could not look away. The film exploded across countries and created something people later called Temple Mania. She played a tiny femme fatale who traded lollipops for attention from toddler soldiers. And although audiences argued about the content, the shock value pulled her into global fame. She became America's sweetheart before she even reached grade school, and Hollywood realized they had never seen anything quite like her. Experts kept studying her voice as she performed. By 1933, her vocal range stretched over 2 octaves, from a sharp 3 to E5, and musicologists compared her control to opera star Maria Callas. The idea that a toddler could hit notes with that level of accuracy thrilled researchers and critics. Her voice wasn't a gimmick, it was a serious instrument, and it carried her through her earliest films with a kind of precision rarely seen, even in adults. This helped her stand alone in a world full of child actors hoping for attention. Her massive breakthrough arrived in 1934 with Bright Eyes. When the film premiered in December, audiences fell in love with her performance of On the Good Ship Lollipop. About 80 million Americans heard her sing during the Depression, either in theaters or on the radio. The song was played more than 200,000 times on the radio in its first year. She even wrote some of her own lyrics and reached an E6 note, a height that trained sopranos admire. At 6 years old, she became the youngest person ever to receive an Oscar when she was given a special juvenile award at the 1935 ceremony. That one film saved Fox Studios from bankruptcy after it earned more than $1 million in its first month, an amount equal to about $20 million today. Her smile, her voice, and her presence on screen kept an entire studio alive. Then came The Little Colonel in 1935. It included a historic moment when Shirley danced with Bill Bojangles Robinson, creating the first interracial dance pairing in Hollywood. Their staircase tap routine became iconic, but not everyone accepted it. Southern theaters removed the scene because segregation laws forbade physical contact between white and black performers. Robinson taught her by holding her hands so she could feel the rhythm instead of counting steps. They choreographed their routine in only 2 days, yet its cultural impact lasted for decades. Audiences loved the pair so much that they made 4 more films together, quietly rewriting Hollywood history with every step they took. Her voice kept evolving too. By 1937, Japanese critics studying her singing called her style child opera because she blended bel canto technique with jazz phrasing. They noted her ability to maintain vibrato and dynamic control that belonged to adult performers. She practiced scales for 5 hours every day under the guidance of her coach. This discipline shaped her into someone who could consistently hit E6, a rare achievement. Her vocal skill allowed her to handle exhausting studio schedules without losing precision, something even older stars struggled with. Curly Top arrived in 1935 and brought another explosion of fame. Her song Animal Crackers in My Soup became the #1 hit in America. Sheet music sold 1 million copies in the first month. Variety magazine called her the Queen of Quavers because she delivered rapid musical phrases with perfect timing. Radio stations played the song an average of 12 times a day, and she earned $1,000 a week in royalties, which equals more than $20,000 today. She was now the highest paid child star in Hollywood, and her films kept breaking records. Behind the scenes, the pressure grew heavier. Fox executives made her work 18-hour days when she was only 7. She filmed scenes, rehearsed songs, and practiced dances without real breaks. During The Little Colonel, her voice cracked for the first time in a recording session. Technicians caught it on tape, and insiders passed the moment around as a whispered piece of gossip. Her mother later said Shirley often fell asleep on set and had to be woken up to continue. Doctors warned about long-term strain, yet the schedule barely changed. Shirley kept smiling in public. She kept carrying the cheerful image everyone expected. She kept working until she retired from acting at 22. By 1936, she was only 8, yet she stepped into Poor Little Rich Girl with Alice Faye as if she already knew the world was watching her. When she sang When I'm With You, phonetics experts leaned in and studied every sound. One of them said her diction was the clearest ever recorded from a child, each syllable shaped with care, almost too perfect for someone her age. The film's success pushed her higher, and people started seeing her as a new kind of child performer who could sing, dance, and act without losing her charm. That year opened a path that felt bigger than anything Hollywood had seen from a child. The next year, she moved into hiding, and something new happened. She yodeled like someone who had grown up in the Swiss mountains. Her accent, her vibrato, the rhythm of every call, everything sounded authentic. Even native speakers paused in disbelief. Director Alan Dwan called her voice an angelic kind of synthesizer because she absorbed regional notes as if she had been singing them her entire life. Her performance spread far beyond the film, and audiences carried those songs in their heads long after they left the theater. It felt like her voice wrapped Swiss traditions in a warm Hollywood glow. Then came 1938, with Rebecca of Sunnybrook Farm, a film packed with 12 original songs that pushed her even further. In one of them, Are You Working?, she reached a high C that critics said shouldn't have been possible for a child's voice. Experts studied her range and found something unusual, something that didn't match the typical limits of someone her age. People in music circles started talking about her as a prodigy who used small tricks and subtle vocal choices to climb to notes that seemed out of reach. Her soundtrack spread everywhere, and the conversations around her voice grew even louder. In 1939, she appeared in The Little Princess, singing Wish You a Merry Christmas in bright Technicolor. After the film came out, Carol's sales shot up by 400%. Her performance brought warmth to people facing hard times, and the song became tied to her name. She donated $50,000 of her royalties to help W.W. Pute's orphans, which added something tender to her growing fame. At that point, audiences didn't only see a talented child, they saw someone who carried kindness with her work. By that same year, she had recorded 24 sides for RCA. She was only 11, yet her album Shirley's Songs sold 3 million units, a platinum-level achievement in today's terms. Songs from her films filled the record, each one praised for its clarity and emotional softness. Her voice felt polished, bright, and full of life. People collected her records the way others collected memories, and her musical success became one of the biggest surprises of that era. Her fame was so strong that in 1939, a group of 22 independent producers filed a lawsuit against 20th Century Fox. They said her movies were so popular that they were losing $1.5 million because theaters didn't have room for their films. But the lawsuit collapsed when Fox showed that Shirley's image and voice earned them $3.5 million that same year. Fox didn't back away from her. They invested even more in her talent because she had become an industry force who could pull Hollywood into new financial territory. Her voice was no longer only entertainment. It was an asset worth millions. The following year, 1940, brought The Bluebird. The movie struggled at the box office, and audiences didn't know what to do with a character who didn't fit her usual cheerful image. Even so, her performance of Lady O cut through the criticism. Critics said the song carried an ethereal tone, something both delicate and mature. Whispers spread that she had trained with a Metropolitan Opera coach, and people started wondering how a 12-year-old developed such clarity. Even with the film failing, fans held on to that song because it felt haunting in a way her earlier work never had. Around that same time, USC researchers ran a vocal study to understand why she could sing so powerfully. They measured her breath control and found that she matched adult soprano levels. Her lung capacity was 25% higher than the average 12-year-old. It suddenly made sense why she could hold long phrases without strain. Coaches and film historians pointed to the study as proof that her ability wasn't just talent. It was physiology mixed with discipline. Then came the opportunity tied to The Wizard of Oz. MGM wanted her for Dorothy in 1940, but she asked for $100,000 and royalties from her voice recordings. The studio refused and turned to Judy Garland. Garland later mentioned the pressure of being compared to Temple, because MGM even tried styling her to resemble Shirley's look. That moment changed two careers at once. Temple walked away from a role that shaped film history, and Garland stepped into a spotlight that could have belonged to her. Still in 1941, she took on Kathleen at just 13. She played an Irish-American girl, and during the number Around the Corner, she reached for operatic lines that startled critics. They said she sounded older than she was, with a range far beyond what people expected. It felt like her first step into a teenage identity on screen. Later, insiders admitted that some of the highest notes had been dubbed because her voice was changing. Her natural tone couldn't always reach those pitches as puberty shifted everything inside her. The truth added a complicated layer to her work because she had always been sold as naturally gifted. That same year, her voice dropped by half an octave. Studio executives panicked because her bright childhood soprano had been the core of her fame. Suddenly, she struggled with notes that once came easily. Recordings from that period show strain in places where she once floated. The studios felt the shift as a crisis, and Shirley herself felt the pressure of having to rebuild something she had never had to question before. She responded with intense training. She hired a coloratura coach and began daily vocal exercises that lasted 2 hours. She tried to stretch her voice back into a 4-octave range, even though the effort was exhausting. During one recording session for Around the Corner, her voice cracked on a high G. It was the first time her voice had openly failed her in her career. That moment marked a turn in her confidence and made her team rely more on dubbing for her higher notes. It changed how she approached singing. It changed how Hollywood used her voice. Even with all the concerns, Kathleen became a surprise hit in 1941, earning more than $2 million for MGM. But behind that success, the whispers about dubbing grew louder. Fans felt shocked when they learned later that soprano Thora Mathiasson handled many of the highest operatic passages. It wasn't revealed to the public at the time, yet insiders knew, and it signaled something bigger. Shirley Temple stepped into 1947 carrying the weight of her childhood fame. You can feel how the shine slowly started slipping away when she appeared in Honeymoon. She was only 19, and the moment she sang "Someday You'll Find Your Bluebird," people sensed something off. Her voice sounded different, softer in a way that didn't match the girl who once lit up theaters. Reviewers noticed it first, saying it didn't sound like her voice at all, and soon fans felt the same confusion. The truth came out when the soundtrack credits revealed that the vocals belonged to Mario Santos. It surprised people who had grown up hearing Shirley's playful voice, and it spread quickly through Hollywood circles. This was the moment everyone realized the sound tied to her name was not something they could always rely on anymore. And once that thought enters the room, it becomes hard to shake. Then came That Hagen Girl the very same year. The film had already been heavy for her, but the small musical moment she had in it brought more criticism. People said her voice sounded thin. Newspapers said her acting felt sad and low. The movie didn't do well at the box office, and even later, when some called it their favorite adult-era picture of hers, it couldn't undo the sting the reviews caused at the time. The comments about her singing added more fuel to the idea that something wasn't right, and Shirley felt it inside. She even admitted later that she felt embarrassed listening to her own playback. It settled into her like a bruise, one that stayed for years, reminding her how hard it was to live up to the glow of her childhood image. Around this time, a voice coach shared a quiet memory of her after Honeymoon. He said she cried when she heard the playback. She knew she wasn't giving what people expected, and she felt the pressure wrap around her. She was struggling to shape her voice into something fit for an adult actress, and each attempt made her more aware of the gap between what Hollywood wanted and what she could give. He said the dubbing rumors broke her in places no one could see. She kept working and even sought training to improve, but the damage to her name had already been whispered into the industry. By 1949, the pressure reached its peak. She appeared in Fort Apache, Mr. Belvedere Goes to College, and Adventure in Baltimore. Each film required more singing. Each performance carried more eyes. Critics kept watching her voice as if waiting for it to fail, and each time they wrote that something felt missing. Mr. Belvedere Goes to College drew some of the harshest comments, pointing out how the sparkle in her childhood songs wasn't there anymore. The weight of these reviews followed her onto every set, and little by little it wore her down. Soon the idea of retirement made sense to her because she no longer felt like she belonged in the place that used to embrace her so warmly. The numbers tell a cold story. Her adult films earned about 70% less than her childhood films. In the late 1930s, her movies brought millions to the box office and kept 20th Century Fox alive. But the moment she stepped into adult roles, audience interest shrank. Films like That Hagen Girl didn't find success at all, and others rarely reached the heights she once enjoyed. It showed how hard it is for a child star to grow up under the same spotlight that once adored them. But the story of her voice goes deeper, because a few years earlier, she faced one of the biggest shocks of her career. In 1941, when she was only 13, MGM placed her in the film Kathleen. The climax demanded an operatic aria called Around the Corner, far beyond what her young vocal cords could deliver. She tried. She pushed through take after take. Her voice cracked. It wavered. After 17 tries, the director knew they needed something else. MGM quietly brought in Thora Mathiasson, a 28-year-old opera singer from the Metropolitan Opera, to record the aria. Shirley lip synced to it on camera. The final scene sounded grand and mature, but it wasn't her. Years later, when the truth surfaced, it stunned everyone who believed they always heard her real voice. People began comparing recordings, and the proof became impossible to ignore. Mathiasson's voice had a rich tone, the kind of fullness only an adult trained for opera could produce. Audio experts lined up the phrasing, the timing, the breathing. Everything matched her studio recording. The only thing missing was her name in the credits. MGM never added it. Her work became one of the earliest and clearest examples of Hollywood's ghost singer era, where someone else's voice hid behind the face the world adored. And once this practice began, studios leaned on it whenever they wanted perfection without telling the audience about the help behind the scenes. Shirley hinted at this years later in her autobiography, when she said that sometimes help was needed. It was a soft way of confessing something she never felt ready to say directly. Kathleen earned $1.8 million, a big number for those years. Yet Mathiasson received no recognition or royalties. It set a pattern in Hollywood, where singers delivered iconic voices without ever getting their names tied to the magic they created. By the time she reached Adventure in Baltimore in 1949, Shirley was carrying not just her childhood legacy, but also personal exhaustion. She was 21 and had just given birth, and she was still filming back-to-back. Her voice couldn't keep up with the musical demands, so the studio made a decision. They brought in Betty Wan, a 26-year-old vocalist with a smooth tone and strong control. This was Wan's very first Hollywood dubbing job. She recorded every song Shirley's character performed, including Pretty as a Picture. And the moment the film released, Wan's voice carried Shirley's singing scenes. Those recordings gave Wan her career. She said years later that the role was her golden ticket. It led her to MGM, where she later dubbed for Natalie Wood, Leslie Caron, and even Rita Moreno in West Side Story. One job with Shirley Temple launched her into the center of Hollywood's musical world. Behind all of this, Shirley was dealing with more than the public knew. The non-stop filming in 1949 strained her already tired voice, and recovering from childbirth made it even harder. It wasn't that she lacked talent. She was simply worn out. Still, the studio needed clean, flawless vocals, so they used a stand-in voice to keep the illusion alive. These details rarely surfaced then, but they show how heavy the expectations were for women in Hollywood, especially those trying to transition out of childhood fame. Later on, audio experts studied Adventure in Baltimore and noticed something unmistakable. Betty Wan's signature vibrato appeared in every song. It was a small flicker in her tone, a fast rise and fall in pitch, and it was one of Wan's personal trademarks. Spectrograms confirmed it, proving that all the singing belonged to her, and not Shirley. This kind of forensic evidence tied Wand to dozens of classic musical tracks and revealed how much hidden work she had done in those years. There is a final twist to all this. Adventure in Baltimore tells the story of a young suffragette in the 1890s who sings songs about women's rights and moral courage. Shirley plays a young woman fighting for her voice and her place in society. Yet the singing that the audience hears is not hers. It belongs to Betty Wand, a woman whose entire career depended on staying invisible behind the stars she supported. The movie spoke loudly about women finding their power, even though its own musical voice came from someone who rarely stepped into the light. It shows how the history of Hollywood is filled with voices that shaped moments without ever being seen.